Hey everyone! So today I'm so happy to share my birth story with my third little baby boy. Well, my third baby, and it's a baby boy. Yeah, it was the most perfect birth. I am still in disbelief. It almost brings tears to my eyes to think about how gracious the Lord was with this birth. So if you don't know, if you didn't see my previous videos leading up to this video, I had about 4 weeks of, actually exactly 4 weeks of prodromal labor because it started at 36 weeks and then went all the way to 40 weeks. He's actually a due date baby, which is so surreal. I looked up that like only 4 to 5% of babies are born on their due date, and he was born at 12:06 a.m. So 6 minutes into his due date. So anyways, I just thought that was cool. But for reference, my last birth story was, it was positive in that I had a healthy baby in the end, but I wouldn't say it was like a beautiful birth story or a super positive birth story. It was tough. It was 36 hours of excruciating pain. There were positioning issues. I ended up transferring to the hospital and got the epidural. Um, there was a lot. It was a tough one. And then my first birth was a C-section. And so I have a C-section, a VBAC, and then another VBAC this time. But my first birth was a C-section. And so anyways, I have two previous births that I wouldn't say are the most positive. And so coming into this birth, I was very hopeful and I did a lot of prep work to, you know, I was praying that it was a positive birth. And ultimately it was, but I had no idea what to expect. And after my last birth, where I had the VBAC, I thought, so I transferred to the hospital when I was 3 centimeters. And I was in, you guys, excruciating pain. And I just sufficed to say after that birth that like I have a really low pain tolerance and like I guess I can't do it. I can't hack it, right? And so then that's kind of like the mentality I had after that birth. And then coming into this birth, I had secretly hoped that I didn't need to do the epidural. And so I did a lot of relaxation techniques and just prepping my body the whole pregnancy for labor and delivery, secretly hoping that I could go natural. And not even to like prove it to myself or prove it to anybody. Like I had a really good heart around it. I wanted to do it for the right reasons because I wanted to have a more positive birth story. And I know that the epidural can delay things and make recovery harder. And there's all these things around the epidural. And if you get the epidural or have gotten the epidural, or no shame whatsoever. I got the epidural like I said, in my last labor, and it seriously saved that labor. I think it took it from something that could have been a very negative experience and turned it into, after I got that epidural, it was a totally positive birth experience from there. But it did make recovery hard, really hard. And so anyway, that's kind of a little backstory on where I was at coming into this labor. So, yeah, lots of answered prayers during this labor and delivery. And I will, at the end of this birth story, I'll go into all the answered prayers that I can think of just off the top of my head. But my favorite part of this birth story is how God was literally in all the minute details, like just down to everything. And so that's kind of how I'll start the video. I had the 4 weeks of prodromal labor, which prodromal labor is so hard because it's such a mind game at that point. You labor is imminent, and it feels more imminent because if you've ever experienced it, you're having real contractions. They're not Braxton Hicks contractions, they are real contractions. And in my case, they were actually causing cervical change. And so for 4 weeks, that's what I was going through. And so I was thinking, oh, it could be any day now, any day now, any day now. And so then I didn't ultimately deliver him until my due date, which I was thinking, oh, there's no way I'm going to my due date. And definitely not past my due date. So, but the weekend before we had him on Thursday at 12:06 a.m. So I actually went into like real strong labor on Wednesday evening. So the weekend prior to that Wednesday, we had the best family time. Like it was just a weekend just full of fun family time. It was just awesome. It was so great. And I'm so grateful to the Lord for giving us that time with our two kids. The last weekend is a family of 4, and it was just great. So then when I was 39 weeks and 4 days, I had a stretch and sweep scheduled with my doctor. And the whole time leading up to it, I was like, yes, let's do this. I'm ready to go. Like, let's put me into labor. But then a couple days leading up to the sweep, I just didn't feel right about it. I was like, you know what? At this point, I'm probably going to go to my due date or after. Who knows? I might even need to be induced. I don't even know. Like at that point, I had given up all hope of going into labor spontaneously or early. And so I was kind of feeling uneasy about the sweep. And then I had just read some things that said that it can cause a really long early labor. And so I was like, well, I feel like I've already been in a really long early labor, so I don't want to prolong it even more. I don't know if that's true, if it does do that. But anyways, there were several reasons why I didn't feel super right about the stretch and sweep. Nevertheless, my appointment day came and I went to my appointment, and I had prayed about it before. I couldn't sleep the entire night before just thinking about it. And I had prayed about it and was just like, Lord, if this is right, just, let it happen. And if not, just give me discernment. So I get to the appointment and they say, oh, you're not actually scheduled for another 3 hours. And my doctor's like over 30 minutes away. So I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I leave and I'm contemplating on the drive back. Should I drive all the way back out here in 3 hours, or should I just cancel the appointment? And I had been feeling a lot of kicks and fetal movement, and so, and I knew like my husband could check my blood pressure when I came home. Like, I didn't feel bad about canceling the appointment. It was just a matter of, do I want to do the sweep or not? And so I took that as God saying, let's not do the sweep. Let's just, give it another week and see how this progresses. And so I didn't do the sweep. I canceled the appointment and I felt really good about it. And so that was 39 weeks and 4 days. I will tell you too that I had, this is TMI, but it's a birth story. So, just keep in mind that there's going to be some, graphic information. But I know that when I listen to birth stories, I love hearing things like this because I don't know, it's just helpful to hear what could happen. So let's see, I think it was on Monday. Yes. Okay. So on Monday, the day that I was supposed to have my appointment, my husband, he's a chiropractor. He did some work on me that he says, this puts all my patients into labor. They swear by it. I've had several patients tell me this is what put them into labor. So he did some work on me. And basically what it is just like really, like a really hard, like kind of painful, soft tissue work, like massage on your inner thighs. And so that's said to be like a pressure point. And yeah, so anyways, he did that for a long time, on that Monday night, the night that I was supposed to do the stretch and sweep. So he did that. And then the following Tuesday morning, I had a lot of bloody show, a lot. And then it continued all day, and then all day on Wednesday too. And it was like a lot. Not like, you know, a fresh bleed. It's not like period, but it's like mixed with my mucus plug. I know it's gross, but that's birth, right? So I had a lot of that all day. When the bloody show started, I was getting really uncomfortable, not contractions, but just like period type cramps that were constant. And I really thought, that's when I actually really thought things were happening, because I was like, okay, these are actually painful and they're constant. But like, I feel like this could turn into labor. So I didn't want to ruminate on it though. And so all day that day, which was Tuesday, I kept myself super busy. So the kids and we went to Costco. We did a huge Costco haul. I came back. I made, prepped a bunch of breakfast burritos for my husband. And then I cleaned out my whole pantry. Like, I just stayed so busy, all the while having strong period cramps. Okay, so I went to the park on that Wednesday morning with my friend and her kids. And so we were all at the park, and I was getting contractions. I didn't know how far apart they were at the time, but I did have to like stop talking and kind of breathe through them. They weren't horribly painful though. I was able to be at the park with my kids, and so they weren't horribly painful, but I did need to breathe through them. And it was my friend that pointed out that they were like every 20 minutes. She was like, well, they've been like every 20, 25 minutes since we got here. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So we leave the park and go home. Nothing happened. Like, all day after the park, all afternoon, through the kids' nap, everything, nothing was really happening. Yeah, again, I wasn't putting much stock into these contractions. And until my husband gets home, and it was just rough. I was so tired. And so he took the kids, I took a bath. He put the kids down for bed. I said goodnight to them and everything. And then I laid down and did I was just relaxing and practicing deep breathing. And I noticed that I was getting contractions again, only like every 20 to 25 minutes. And so I was like, man, why are these contractions so far apart? And this is the day before my due date. My due date was on Thursday, and this was that Wednesday. So I decide at this point it's like 8:30, probably 8:30 at night. And so I just say, okay, I am going to just get up and just start doing stuff. Yeah, so I'm prepping sandwiches and everything. And again, it's like 8:30 at night. And I notice that as I'm up and moving, my contractions are actually closer together. At this point, they're like 10 minutes apart, consistently 10 minutes apart. And I'm like, okay, like maybe being up and moving is what my body needs to like make this progress. So I just stayed up and moving. And I just kept busy, and my contractions kept coming. And then I had some last minute things to put in my hospital bag. And at this point, I had been having them every 10 minutes for about the last hour. So I felt pretty confident at this point that like this was progressing. And if not, we're still going to the hospital. I was like, no, we're still going to the hospital. I was so done. I was like, if they need to put me on Pitocin, I don't even care. Like, we're going. And so, I put all the last minute things in my hospital bag and I started getting ready, doing my hair, doing my makeup, again, just keeping myself busy. And so after my contractions were continuing 10 minutes apart and getting more intense, that's the other thing, is that with prodromal labor, they don't really get more intense. But this felt different because they were staying consistently 10 minutes apart and they were getting more intense. That's when I called my mom, who was planning to come and stay with the kids while we were at the hospital. She lives about an hour away though, so I knew that I needed to call soon, because if this progresses, oh, and then also on top of that, we were over 30 minutes away from the hospital. So I was like, okay, I better call my mom now. So I called her, let her know, and she pretty much came right away. At this point, I don't know, it was maybe 9:30. But again, I still had no idea if this was true labor. Or, again, prodromal labor that was eventually going to just die off, which, I was just praying that that wasn't the case. So after I called my mom, I went down and told my husband that my mom's on her way and I think it's go time. And so he shoots up and he's like, what? Like, this is it? But again, I was like not hopeful. So I didn't get his hopes up, but I said, I do want to go to the hospital. Okay, so we got some last minute things together, and the whole time I was praying that I was at least a 4 when we got to the hospital. I was like, oh Lord, please just let me at least be a 4 so that they could admit me. But I knew that my contractions were nowhere near where they needed to be to get a baby out. And so that's what was kind of concerning, because they were nowhere near as painful as they were with my last baby. Even when I was at a 3, and we decided to just go to the hospital and get the epidural, they were nowhere near where those were. And so I just was, I don't know, I was hopeful, but I wasn't confident. So I did kind of feel silly going to the hospital. And then even my mom got here and she was like, you look really good. Like, you're handling these contractions really well. And I was like, I know, but I don't know. Hopefully I'm at least, a 4. So anyway, okay. Also, at some point, my friend texted me. Let's see what time she texted me. Okay, I don't know what time she texted me, but it was some time when my contractions were about 10 minutes apart. She said, and this was the friend that I was at the park with. So she said, I don't want to be the annoying friend that keeps asking if you've had the baby, but did those contractions keep going today? And I said, well, super inconsistently throughout the day with several hours of none at all. And then for the last hour, I've had them every 10 minutes or so, but only if I stay up and moving. If I lie down, then they're like every 25 minutes. And so then I said, and I have to stop when they come and breathe through them, and they're about 1 minute long each. And so then I said, so I don't know, LOL. And so then I texted her. I don't have the times on here, but this had to have been maybe like 30 minutes later. I said, okay, this has got to be it. They're 3 to 6 minutes apart now. And so she said, yay. And then she said, are they getting more uncomfortable? And I just said, yes. And then she said, you got this. You're going to meet your baby so soon. And that was really encouraging. So, okay. So then we're driving to the hospital and my contractions are about every 4 to 5 minutes apart. At this point, yeah, they were probably they were inconsistent. I remember they were like every, I would say 3 minutes to 10 minutes apart. And so on the way to the hospital, I know I had like 4 or 5 contractions in the car. And I was still I was handling those pretty well too. Like, I just would completely relax my body and breathe through them. And I was totally able to, like, didn't make a single noise through the contractions other than maybe like a deep breath. And then another technique that I did too is my friend Lana with Girl Teach Me, she has a YouTube channel too. she has a pregnancy course, and in her course, she teaches um, about this concept. And this might be a well known concept, but I've only ever heard it from her. So I'm just going to say that she coined the concept. But she gives this analogy of like a storm. And so you have buffalo and you have cows in a storm, and cows will run away from the storm, and buffaloes will run through the storm. And the buffalo actually, they get through the storm faster by going through it, and the cows have to endure the storm longer because they're trying to run from it. And so she said labor is very similar, where if you be the buffalo and you run through the storm and you don't try and escape the pain or the sensation, whatever you want to call it, then your labor won't be as long, and you'll get through it faster. So the idea is to be the buffalo. And so I told my husband that, and he just kept saying, be the buffalo, be the buffalo. And so what that meant for me is, so whenever I would stand straight up, the contractions were like a lot more painful. But if I would like lean over onto anything, they were less painful. And so I decided to be the buffalo and to stand, like force myself to stand straight up during the contractions, but to control my breathing and to really make sure that I was breathing through them and relaxing my body. And so I would just make sure that my face was relaxed, and then, everything down there was just super relaxed. And that's what I did for every contraction. And so I remember telling that to my husband in between a contraction, and he was like, okay, but just make sure you pace yourself, because he was expecting my last labor and delivery, which was like 36 hours. And so he was like, just make sure you pace yourself. And I'm like, yes, but I want to get through the storm. So anyway, that's what I would do. So the contractions in the car, I was able to breathe through them and relax. So again, I'm thinking, oh, I'm able to breathe through these. Like, I'm handling these pretty well. Like, I feel like just so silly going to the hospital at this point. I didn't try to escape the pain. Instead, I just leaned into it. Yeah, okay. So we get to the hospital, and we parked way further away than we needed to. We just parked at like the wrong entrance, and my husband was like, do you want me to like go get the car? We can. And I was like, no, I need to be walking. Like, walking is good. My contractions were like on top of each other as we were walking. And so I was like, nope, this is good. I'm just going to like power through. And so I had several strong contractions on the way into the entrance of the hospital. So we get all checked into our room, and immediately once we get in the room, the contractions started to feel different. Like, they started to feel like, okay, yeah, it's probably good that we're here at the hospital. They were much more intense. And then I started shaking. Once I got into the bed, I started shaking. And I thought to myself, no way am I in transition right now. Like, I know that shaking means you're in transition, but I was like, there's no way. Like, these are not where they need to be in transition. And so anyways, then the nurse checks me, and sure enough, I'm an 8. An 8. I could not believe it. You guys, I was hoping to just be a 4. I could not believe that I was an 8. And this is just proof that every labor is so different. Because again, these contractions were nowhere near as painful as they were in my last labor when I was a 3. And so I was so happy. And one of the things too, one of my prayers was that my water didn't break until right before I pushed the baby out. And that prayer was answered. My water did not break. And I think that had a lot to do with why the pain was so much less intense, because my water didn't break, and it kind of, your waters provide that cushion through your contractions, is what I've heard. So I could have cried, you guys. I was so happy. It was so redemptive that I was an 8. And even like my husband was like in shock. He was like, no way. Like, he was expecting us to be there for a very long time. He knew that like I was handling these contractions really well compared to last time. So anyway, the nurse, she like shouts out the window or out the door. She was like, she's an 8. And then I hear another nurse go, an 8? And I was just thinking to myself in that moment, like, they probably guess when women come in, these nurses probably guess how far along these women are. I would do that if I were a nurse. And like I said, I was handling the contractions really well. And so, I don't know, everyone was surprised. They started getting everything ready and like it was awesome. So, I had several more contractions lying on my side with the peanut ball, and that's what I chose to do. That felt good for me. And I think it's because that's how I practiced my relaxation when I was experiencing prodromal labor. So, when I was experiencing those contractions, that's how I had practiced um, my breathing techniques. Then I started to feel the urge to push. And my water still hadn't broken at the time. And so my midwife, by the way, my OB, who I had been seeing my whole pregnancy, wasn't there. And the on call gal was a midwife. And so even later, my OB was like, that was the perfect person to be on call for you because he knew that I was more naturally minded. And anyways, so that was just another like way that God was just in all the minute details of this birth. I didn't even pray for that, and he delivered. So anyways, my water still hadn't broken, and the midwife said that there was still a tiny bit of cervix left and that she could break my water, and that could get me to the pushing stage sooner. And so at this point, I was like, yes, please, let's get this over with. I want to meet my baby. So she tried breaking my water and she wasn't able to. And just, oh, God is so good. And also, I feel like God has such a sense of humor because he was like, no, you said you didn't want your water to break until right before. And so, no, she's not going to be able to break your water. And so she tried and she wasn't able to. So then, really, it was probably just like one more contraction than I was able to push. And so I started pushing on my back because at that point, changing positions seemed like impossible. And so, yeah, so I didn't want to change positions and go on my hands and knees or anything. But then I realized, nope, no way am I going to be able to push on my back. I have to change positions. And so I flipped to my hands and knees. And then that too felt impossible. I was like, oh no, I can't do this. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to push this baby out. Like, this is too painful. It just felt too impossible. And I had a moment of panic, realizing that there was no way out. And this is like the only time in this whole labor where I panicked and I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do this. And so I knew that I just had to go through the storm because no one could push him out for me. And that was scary. It was actually legitimately scary. And so I remember saying, I can't do this. And the midwife looked at me and she said, actually, you're the only one who can. And that provided a little encouragement, but also like made me panic even more because I knew she was right. And so, I was just praying. Like, I'm going to cry thinking about it because it was such a surreal experience. Like, I was just really praying, and I've really felt the presence of Jesus there in that moment to just get me through. And so I started pushing like my life depended on it. And wow, I always heard in other birth stories that the pushing phase is what gave people relief from the contractions, but that was not the case for me. It made the contractions so much more painful, so much more intense. But I think there was fear around it too. I think that I had some slight fear of like, okay, I'm unmedicated right now, and I have to push a baby out of me, like with nothing, like no medication, nothing. And so I think there was some fear there. So yeah, I kept going, and then I felt the ring of fire and so badly wanted to stop pushing when I felt that. But then I knew I would lose all the progress that I had made in the last contraction if I did. And so I started screaming and pushed harder. And I remember screaming, oh God, help me. And then I was like, somebody please help me. And at that moment, his head popped out. And it was the most surreal feeling. I heard someone, okay, so the head popped out and then I was like, oh no, we still have the shoulders. And I could feel everything. I could feel that it was the head and then I could feel that it was the shoulders. And so I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to go through another contraction to get these shoulders out. But so I just kept pushing and I was like, nope. And I pushed the shoulders out and then out came the baby. And someone said, grab your baby. And oh, the relief once the baby comes out is like crazy. But it was the most surreal feeling in the world once my baby came out. And you can see in the pictures that my face is just like in disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I was delirious. I was just in so much shock. I couldn't believe what had actually happened. I was on my hands and knees, and so the baby was underneath me, and I did grab him, but then I felt so weak, like I was going to collapse. So I said, can someone please take the baby and help me turn? And so I turned around, and then they put the baby on my chest. And I was so dazed and honestly confused about what had just happened. And it was like otherworldly, like I was in a completely different world. I'll never forget that feeling. And then I got to hold my baby, and other than all the pain that I was feeling down there still, because at that point they're like kind of cleaning me up and doing everything down there, which really, really hurt. Other than that, it was bliss, and I was just in baby bliss and baby heaven, and oh, it was so great. Best feeling ever when you meet your baby for the first time. Okay, so in total, we were at the hospital for 1 hour before he was born, and I pushed for 13 minutes. But I'll tell you, that 13 minutes felt like over an hour. But I didn't tear at all. And I'm so shocked, you guys, that I didn't tear, because it literally felt like I was ripping right in half as I was pushing him out. So I don't know how I didn't tear, but I'll tell you what, no epidural and no tearing has made recovery night and day compared to my last one. Night and day. Yeah, so so in my notes here, I say, for encouragement to those mamas who wanted to go natural but went for the epidural in a previous birth. Every birth is so different. But yeah, God is so good. He answered so many prayers. And so, yeah, I will just go into all the prayers that he answered. The first is that I was group B strep negative. So I have, my body just does not tolerate, antibiotics well. I don't think anybody really does, but I have some like crazy things that happen when I take antibiotics. And so I really did not want to have to take antibiotics. And so I was just praying that I was group B strep negative so that I didn't have to make that decision. I know that there's all this controversy, and I didn't know what I would have chosen, if I would have taken the antibiotic or not. And so I was just praying that I didn't have to make that decision. And so God answered that prayer. I was group B strep negative. My water didn't break. I already said that. I had the most amazing nurses, and the midwife, I talked to you about that. They were incredible. Yeah, so that was an answered prayer. I started labor naturally. That's what I didn't want to be induced, because since I'm a VBAC, if I had to get induced, then I wouldn't have been able to deliver at the hospital I wanted to deliver at. So that was a major answered prayer. I was able to relax through the contractions very well. I had no epidural, which was kind of like a secret prayer of mine that I didn't even really want to admit, but that was answered. Once labor actually started, it didn't stall out. So the total time that I was in like real labor, not prodromal labor, but like once I knew the contractions were real, it was 4 hours from the time that it started to the time that it ended. So really, I had I don't want to say skipped the early labor portion, because I had 4 weeks of it, but essentially like once labor started, it was just instantly active labor. Okay, so even down to the day that the baby was born, God answered this prayer, because I wanted him to be born later in the week, because my husband doesn't get paid anyways, it was a whole like payment thing. Um, and so if he was born later in the week, then he would miss less time from work, unpaid. And so he was born on a Thursday. My husband went to work the entire day Wednesday. Oh, and then also I didn't hemorrhage. And I had hemorrhaged with my previous two, and I didn't with this one. So yeah, just lots of answered prayers. God was in all the minute details of this birth, and I'm just so grateful. Yeah, so this is little baby Bennett Joseph Luke. We call him Benny. If it were up to me, we would just name him Benny. I don't know. We just wanted him to have like maybe a more formal name to put on a resume when he's 30 years old. So little Benny Joe, and he was born my smallest baby, 7 pounds 5 ounces, and which just, oh, he feels so tiny. My previous baby was 9 pounds, and the one before that was 8 pounds. So he's my little small guy. 20 inches long, born at 12:06 a.m. on his due date. So that is my unbelievably positive and beautiful birth story. The most perfect birth story that I could have ever prayed for.